educate them on the various experiences in his civil services career, teaching them micro and macroeconomics with practical examples. We had an in-house Google in Appa. I had the privilege and honor to be the Vigneshwara while my Appa dictated his memoirs. It was an emotional journey, traveling with him and acting as his scribe. It was my privilege to have my father write the foreword for the book that I wrote, called 360 at 60, probably for the first time when a father wrote a foreword for his daughter. His clarity and logic amazed me. He had an innate ability to look at any situation with a clear, rational mind. It looked that he had a built-in decision-making machine that operated at lightning speed, an embodiment of discipline. Who else could stick to a routine like him? Every day he moved through life through such precision that amazed me. Those long walks he took every day, rain or sunshine. He had a secret stash of tranquility that he brought with him everywhere he went. From books to cricket, listening to BBC and CNN, enjoying an occasional hot fudge sundae, he had only few indulgences. But what was truly amazing was how he made everyone feel comfortable talking about everything. He had this uncanny ability to connect with people on any subject. His success never got to his head, and when he faced failure, he bounced back with the spirit of a true champion. His impact extends beyond his family. He has touched many hearts. The most as a daughter I can do to honor his memory is by keeping it alive, adhering to the things he wanted us to be, carrying on his legacy, mixed with guidance from our emotions and loyalty. His shoe will indeed be hard to fill as he left a stamp on that little village that he grew up in, and finally left us a peer to a generation of people who cited his example. That is Appa, Mr. G Ramachandran, for you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your tributes, for sharing your precious memories, and for helping us learn more about Sri G Ramachandran. I would now like to invite Mr. Navneet Ganapati, the grandson of Sri G Ramachandran, to introduce our chief guest.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me immense joy to present a distinguished civil servant and successful executive, Mr. S. Krishnan, IAS, who is currently holding the position of Secretary in the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology for the Government of India. The IAS was where his career took off in 1989. He has had different roles that he has occupied at different times, thereby exhibiting his proficiency in a number of fields. Before joining his current role, he worked as Additional Chief Secretary, Industries, Investment Promotion and Commerce Department, Government of Tamil Nadu, from March 2020 till August 2023, which was a challenging period due to COVID. Tamil Nadu under him showed us that it's possible to go through tough situations and be among the first few states that recovered quickly. Some key positions held by Mr. Krishnan through his professional life include Additional Chief Secretary, Finance Department, Principal Secretary, Housing and Urban Development Planning, Development and Special Initiatives Development, but not limited thereto. Founder CEO, Tamil Nadu Infrastructure Development Board, Chairman of the 5th State Finance Commission, Tamil Nadu. His experience cuts across sectors, thus indicating his versatility on his part to handle complex portfolios. Sri Krishnan also has an international background as he served as the Senior Advisor in the Office of the Executive Director for India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh and Bhutan at the International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C., where he represented the Government of India on various G20 expert groups on international financial architecture and global financial safety nets. His early career was indeed a solid base for all his achievements. From 2000 to 2004, he worked as Deputy Director at Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration and Private Secretary to the Union Finance Minister. He proved himself as an efficient crisis manager while working as District Collector of Virudhunagar, where he successfully executed development programs for 3 years. His wide knowledge about governance systems, coupled with his financial understanding and industrial expertise, have greatly contributed towards shaping Tamil Nadu's economy as well as other national issues. His dedication to serving people better, in addition to his ability to solve complicated problems through negotiation skills, deserves appreciation. I would now like everyone to welcome our chief guest, Mr. S. Krishnan, IAS, so that he can share with us some insights gained over time. It's such a privilege to have you here, sir.
Thank you very much. As Mr. Krishnan goes up to the podium, the front head table is being rearranged so that all of us can watch his presentation. Thank you.
It's a bit like watching a movie from the front row.
86 paise just for papers.
Thank you. Good morning to all of you. Dr. C. Rangarajan, Mr. Sripati, Dr. Chandramouli, Dr. Shanmugam, Mr. Gangadharan, and Mr. Panisamy. You want me to? Okay. No, I'm fine. Hold on. It's fine. I guess when you're in an arena literally shaped in this fashion, you have to pivot to face different segments of the audience, and I think that's a lesson in the way civil servants have to operate at different points in time. Let me at the outset, I think what we heard from Dr. Chandramouli and Mrs. Gangadharan about Mr. G Ramachandran certainly humbles me even more than when I first received the invitation to speak. An endowment lecture, particularly in memory of a person as great as this and who's gone before, a few decades before us in the civil service, is always a challenge. Normally speaking, it's not a challenge that I would have accepted so easily. But I think a number of reasons just tip the scales. First and foremost, when your former boss requests you, it is an order. So when Mr. Sripati says you need to turn up, you need to turn up. You don't say, he is the former chief secretary, and once a chief secretary, always a chief secretary. Next, I always recall that Mr. G Ramachandran, along with Mr. M.G. Balasubramaniam and Mr. K.V. Ramanathan, were three people. When I got married in 1993, my father-in-law insisted that these are the three people I want you to meet. I don't care if you meet my other members of the family or not. And I was taken to meet all three of them at that stage. So you could almost say that he was part of my dowry. So, and of course, serving in Delhi now, an opportunity to come to Chennai is something that one can't refuse. And above all, having this event in Madras School of Economics with Dr. C. Rangarajan presiding over it is always an honor. And so much as there is tremendous trepidation and nervousness of having to speak before such a distinguished audience comprising so many people who have served with great distinction before me in the civil service, in addition to those who have been in public causes, I think I made brave to accept the invitation and deliver this particular address. Apart from my meeting Mr. G Ramachandran sometime in 1993, I just joined the finance department in September of 1992 as an undersecretary. And one of the stories that I heard there early on was Mr. G Ramachandran had been joint secretary in the finance department with the legendary T.A. Varghese. And after that, the government, he continued as finance secretary as was described. And when the government changed in 1967, one of the things that they did was he carried a letter from his minister seeking a special release of funds from the government of India, because at the time when the government changed, the outgoing government did not want the treasury to be empty. And the usual line which is spouted, Gajanavum Kali, Kalanjiyam Kali, Varakudadungathukkaga, they went and received a specific amount to see that the new government could at least start off with some liquidity. And what is remarkable about his career is, of course, a description of how he managed these transitions in 1967, in Tamil Nadu, in 1977 in Delhi, and a number of these places, number of instances. And I guess this is a skill which is very, very relevant to civil servant, continues to be very relevant to civil servants. So there's a lot to be learnt from his life and history. There's a lot to be learnt not just for civil servants, but for people who are involved in any way in public life, of what it means to continue to function with integrity and deliver what is needed. Now I come to the other peril of being a civil servant. Dr. Chandramouli here may not remember, he used to be a Deputy Commissioner of Commercial Taxes when I was an Assistant Collector training. And one of the things he told me, and I was about to finish training, was that, you're just finishing training. So as long as you're on training, you can ask any question you want to. Tomorrow when you become a sub-collector, you're expected to know it already. Right? So today as I speak, I'm reminded of that. I've spent barely about 8 months or 7 months as Secretary in the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, but as a civil servant, you're expected to be an expert even when you start. And that's the spirit with which you need to throw yourself at your job, throw yourself at your task to see that something can happen. But the topic itself is extremely interesting, and I'm very glad. Normally they give you a choice of 3 topics and will you choose this, will you choose that. They gave me one topic and I think it just clicked. And whoever thought of it, possibly Mr. Ganapati or whoever thought of it, I think it's very key and critical. Very key and critical at this point in time. And again, very appropriate to speak in the presence of Dr. C. Rangarajan, because as was pointed out, resilience became a very key issue, particularly during the pandemic. And as many of you would remember, Dr. Rangarajan chaired the high power committee which the government of Tamil Nadu established at that time to address issues relating to how to keep the economy going and how to ensure that resilience of Tamil Nadu's economy was preserved. Based on his advice and based on all the inputs which we received, and I had the proud privilege of serving as the member secretary, so to speak, or convener of that particular committee, and the report was truly, I think the lesson we learnt is, why are there so many Rangarajan committee reports all over in every field? That's because he's probably one of the most efficient and effective chairs of any committee in terms of producing an output and ensuring that it contains implementable recommendations. And I can honestly say that the government of Tamil Nadu implemented many of those recommendations, and with pride we can now say that in that year, in the COVID year in 2021, we were probably the only economy in India which did not actually shrink. And Dr. Shanmugam has documented that in papers, and in that year we actually found that there was a marginal growth even in a year which was as bad as the COVID year. So in that sense, I think speaking of resilience continues to be relevant, as many people continue to say. Neither has the world economy nor has India's economy fully recovered from the impact of COVID, and there are many other risks and challenges which we will continue to face. Now that is what happens with technology. Resilience has to find some other tool, but is there a way that we can change the slide, please? Yeah. Oh no. Anyway, so I think they will find the suitable slides. But I think basically economic resilience becomes very important in the context of withstanding shocks. And in the period since even the pandemic, we've had other shocks, geopolitical shocks, which many of you are aware of. Ukraine, the Gaza Strip now, Palestine, and issues in all these places where it continues to be a key element of the way that the economy itself works. And we are facing a number of other risks. Inequality, non-inclusiveness is a key risk, both in the way that gaps between countries, gaps between regions of a country widen and what it can do to the social and economic fabric of the world. Job displacement due to automation. We are talking about technology, but what risks it holds is something that we need to be concerned about. Supply chain concentration. We saw this during the pandemic. We continue to see this. If you look at it, internationally, the supply of semiconductor chips is dominated by Taiwan. And today is something that, I think everybody is in the fear that what happens if there is an issue there. The dynamics of geopolitics, again, is something that needs no explanation. We need to ensure that there are supply chains which are resilient. We have to ensure that geopolitical issues do not upend the economy suddenly, whether it is in terms of oil or whether it is in terms of supply of essential things today like semiconductor chips and electronics. And climate change is another key issue that we need to address along with waste management. And natural disasters are the other thing which are a constant challenge to the way that an economy stays resilient. Now, interestingly, all of these elements, in a sense, have some kind of mitigation and some kind of solution through technology. And that is the way in which we need to address some of these issues. Sometimes, even when the technology itself is likely to cause the disruption, where it is automation or job changes, I think you're often reminded of that one phrase from the Vishnu Sahasranamam, Bhayakrit Bhayanashanaha. So he creates the fear and he can destroy the fear. So the same entity that creates the fear is probably the entity that needs to destroy the fear. Now, coming to this, and why technology is important is that in human history, starting from the very beginning, I think technology is what has disrupted the path of growth. Technology is what has caused growth. Here I am just summarizing what has happened with the so-called industrial revolutions. But even before that, whether it is the discovery of fire or whether it is the discovery of the wheel or anywhere, human history is replete with examples where technology is what has been the change factor. And today we are the commonly used term Industry 4.0, and already people have gone to Industry 5.0 and 6.0. They talk about it. But fundamentally, that is about the way digital technology impacts what happens with the rest of the economy. And I think today, when I use the term technology, I'm almost using it coterminous with digital technologies and not the broader meaning that it has, partly because of the position I hold today, but also partly because today everyone understands technology to be digital technology. Now, these are the various things, elements in Industry 4.0 that all of us keep talking about all the time. These terms are thrown about, whether it is artificial intelligence, of course, and machine learning, whether it is robotics, whether it is cloud computing, Internet of Things. All of these terms, everyone keeps speaking about how these can be adopted to change the way industry works today, to change the way various parts of the economy work, and to a substantial extent to change the way even the way management and governance work in different organizations, not just in government, but even in the private sector. And clearly, the possibilities of productivity and the possibility of what can happen is something which is tremendous and not fully realized. We have, for instance, the 5G networks which have been seeded across the country. But with the 5G networks, have we utilized the full potential of it, particularly in terms of its application to industry, is something which has not yet happened. We speak of artificial intelligence, and everyone is very fond of speaking of artificial intelligence in terms of the large language models and what it can do to write a school essay or what it can do to produce a quick write-up on something or the other. So it's more like an idle time plaything that we often look at it. But the possibilities that it has in terms of drug discovery, improving productivity is tremendous. In fact, the International Monetary Fund is now of the view that possibly the disruptive impact of it in terms of the higher growth that it can produce and the productivity increases that it can produce today are almost on par with what happened with the late 19th century industrial revolution developments in Britain and in parts of the Western world. So that is the kind of disruptive impact that is expected and which we should be able to harness. And I think in the Indian context becomes that much more important because that is the opportunity of leapfrogging that a country like India has. We are very fond of saying, for instance, that we will become the third largest economy shortly. We are the fifth largest right now. In terms of sheer size, undoubtedly we will grow. We are a large country and we have to become the largest economy in the world at some point or the other. But I think what is more important is what it means for the people who live in the country in terms of how much their per capita income goes up and how much their welfare goes up. And that becomes a critical determinant, and that really happens on account of increased productivity and better distribution of those incomes throughout the economy, and that is something which technology can certainly help to do for all of us. Now, clearly, these are some of the elements of technology which can be used and need to be spread throughout, but very critical for harnessing technology is really the human capital, is really the way in which people of this country get the relevant skills and are able to move up the productivity ladder and are able to move up in terms of their contributions to what can happen to the economy. And if we have to address fears of job losses, fears of people losing their jobs in the context of all of this, then clearly, I mean, many of us have to be reskilled and retrained. You know, I often fear that. Just like Mr. G Ramachandran, or at least I think he spent a year probably as a lecturer. I didn't even do that. I've just done one job all my life, and I really wonder whether I'm good enough for another job if it comes to that. But reskilling is something which is very important for many of us in the economy. I do find that the younger generation is much more adept at this. Many of them do not want to spend more than 3 or 4 years doing one kind of job. They are constantly trying to rediscover newer things and learn newer things, and which is, I think, essentially a good thing to do. And as they learn more digital technology, as they move up, and a lot of this gets into practically every sphere. It is very interesting that, you know, sometimes we think that some of digital technology, etc., is reserved for certain spheres in terms of if you're doing electrical engineering or computer engineering, and that's where you learn about digital stuff, or that's where you learn about artificial intelligence. Recently, we had a delegation from the University of New York at Albany who visited with us, and we were discussing as to how they are approaching various aspects of this. And it was very interesting that their approach to artificial intelligence is to actually have a course and have it taught in every department of the university, including how artificial intelligence will impact on art, on culture, on education, on healthcare, on every single aspect, and not just something that you do in the computer science department. So that is the way in which probably we need to adopt technology across a range of spheres. And the other element, of course, is that, you know, India as a country, if we are talking about resilience and if we are talking about long-term, what happens is our ability to become an R&D center. It's very interesting. We all speak about, you know, what measures have been taken to bring in the semiconductor industry in India, and I'll speak about it a little later too. But one thing we don't realize is that in terms of design of semiconductors, almost a full 1/3 of the human resources across the world which are deployed on the design of semiconductors are located out of India. And practically every major company, whether you're talking about a Qualcomm or an AMD or IBM, or many of whom who now are fabless companies who do not actually manufacture semiconductor chips, most of their design work takes place in India. And it's an interesting element of trying to look at the design element and see what possibilities are there in terms of the higher employment it can generate. And research and development in that sense becomes that much more key. Many of us are aware, and you know, we were quite unhappy when the Ford Motor Company had to wind up their production operations here in Sriperumbudur. But how many of you are aware that they set up their global capacity center here in Chennai, capability center here in Chennai, and that R&D center employs 15,000 people against the 3,000 that were employed on the factory floor. So that is the possibility there, and that is a possibility when you have a more talented group of people, and that is a way in which this phase of transformation can end up being more inclusive for even our own country and our own state. And of course, there are issues which relate to cybersecurity challenges and things, because there again, it is technology which brings in a lot of these problems. Many of us have faced it in real life, and this is an ongoing thing where we have, as part of resilience, we have to look at this seriously, because, you know, just as it makes it much more efficient to collect data, much more efficient to keep data, when something goes wrong, it can also go wrong on that same scale. Some of you may recall a few years ago when almost billions of dollars were stolen from the Bangladesh central bank by a bunch of cyber criminals. So if there's to be a scam, it can be a scam on that scale as opposed to the way what we are usually used to. So cybersecurity, prevention of cybercrime then becomes that much more important. Now, this is just to speak about what kind of impact, as an example, artificial intelligence can actually have on the manufacturing supply chain. And that is a space which is again not used as widely yet as we need to, because that really needs to combine with the way Internet of Things works, the way we install more sensors, the way we collect more data, the way the data gets analyzed, and the insights that it provides to the way the manufacturing ecosystem itself operates. And the possibilities of enhancing productivity are substantially more. Clearly, of course, there's also a possibility of displacement of the conventional kind of shop floor workforce that you would need, and you'll have to really think of how you retrain and how you redeploy those people across various spaces. So this is, again, fundamentally about higher skilling, fundamentally about ensuring that people are retrained and reskilled to adapt to the newer environment, and we really go back into the design economy of many of these things. This is where we speak of the possibility of job displacement. I think this is something that we should not underplay the importance of this, but we also need to realize that India in its own way is in a fairly good position as far as job displacement is concerned. It's simply because of the level of development we are today, and you would find that amongst the lower income countries, what this shows is the number of people who may not get displaced is also large. The fear of displacement today is really of certain categories of white collar jobs which in the services sector which were done a lot more. So we are at again, when you are a leapfrogging economy, you have the advantage of trying to adapt and bypass. You don't go that route, and you try and make sure that you go into an area and you go into a space where you can continue to create jobs in sectors where they continue to be needed. So that is the way in which the complementarity works, and I will of course leave this with many of you. I don't want to go into labor you with a lot of these details, but clearly the complementarity percentages in India, and where the blue, for want of a better word, I think, what are the skyscrapers, as they used to call those cricketing terminology in the old days. The blue skyscrapers, clearly countries like India and Brazil, who are emerging markets, are in a significantly better off position. And though, of course, when we take them off the lower skilled jobs, we have to take them directly into higher skilled jobs. So the challenge really lies in the human development effort that we make. The other element that, interestingly enough, hasn't been done so far, and my ministry has engaged ICRIER as an agency, is to estimate the size of the digital economy. There are 2 or 3 methodologies which are adopted, something which is adopted by the Asian Development Bank, something which is adopted by the OECD, to try and measure the size of the digital economy. The study is currently under progress, but early results show that currently the digital economy, which is defined quite simply as just those parts of the economy which are dominated by digital, that is electronics, the manufactured electronics which are used in that space, and the digital companies which do both delivery and the goods that they deliver are digital. Just that portion of the economy is growing almost twice as fast as the rest of the economy. And the overall target that we are setting ourselves is that when the country's economy, today the digital economy is probably at about $350 billion, a little over $100 billion in electronics manufacture, and a little over $250 billion in terms of the software and the ITES services. The expectation is that by the time we are through with this, and by the time the country's economy is 5 trillion, and today our share is of the digital economy in the overall is about 10%, 8 to 10%. By the time we are through with this, because of the faster growth here, we should be $1 trillion when the country's economy is 5 trillion. So almost 20% would be the share of the digital economy, given that it's the fastest growing segment. And now let me come. I mentioned that electronics and the other part of it, the software services, are the 2 segments which are important. And in the electronics segment where we stand currently, globally, the estimated place where we stand and where we are currently, we are trying to target an enhanced share of the global market. Currently, it's dominated by China, as you can see, 60%. So which then basically means it's also a resilience question in terms of not being dependent on a single source of supply and in terms of not being subject to geopolitical risks. So you can see that, China and countries of East Asia tend to dominate this, and India's share is currently only about a little over 3%. And the whole idea needs to be that the overall share of electronics productions in India's GDP really needs to go up. Now, it's interesting that when you look at the history of electronics production in India, it used to be significantly higher, domestic production, but when we signed the ITA agreement in 1997, which permitted much freer import of computers and laptops and ensured easier availability, it had a flip side in the sense that the domestic production industry virtually went out of business. Many of us, I see many grey heads here, many of us remember the old brands of Onida and BPL and Solidaire and Dayanara, and none of whom are present anywhere in the economy today. And many brands which were made in India are no longer made in India in the electronics sector, and many of them got imported. Now, of course, we can say that, why didn't we protect this and we should have continued, but I wouldn't say that that was necessarily unwise policy at that point in time. What it did was probably make available computers and various other IT products much more easily available to consumers in India, and that probably ensured that in the overall IT sector, the growth that we saw in the ITES sector as services was ensured by the easier availability of this equipment. So in that sense, but today, I think for other reasons, because of the resilience requirement, the strategic requirements, the electronics manufacturing sector in India necessarily needs to grow. And that is the story we are looking at today. And as you can see from this, we are trying to see that the electronics manufacturing sector kind of triples in about 4 years' time. And we reach about $300 billion. A very large chunk of this, let us remember, is actually mobile phones. Mobile phones have overtaken the rest of the economy, and that's nearly $100 billion. 1/3 of the overall electronics output ends up being mobile phones. And the IT hardware sector is a distant second or third. And we need to grow across a range of these segments to ensure that India's story increases. And even now as we speak, if we look at the total volume of production in the country and the total consumption, it's only recently that the total production has overtaken in FY17, that total production in the country overtook the total imports, and we are able to make sure that in terms of the total consumption in the market, we are somewhere. And of course, earlier in the introduction, we spoke of how exports are also growing rapidly, and Tamil Nadu is one of the big centers for growth of exports in this entire space, and it's worth about $24 billion now. So this is the kind of way in which this graph is growing, and we need to see a substantially enhanced growth in this space. This is a segment which is growing 17 to 18% and even faster. And this is a critical area of importance for the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology today. This is just to give you a picture of where various segments of the electronics investment stand. We are expecting mobile phones to be really big. They're already very big as part of the overall share. We expect to see them much larger. Auto electronics is another big segment. IT hardware and medical electronics, consumer electronics, and especially industrial electronics. So each of these needs to become really big as the economy grows, and that is how we build resilience in terms of the supply chains and making sure this happens. And the story here is really one of actually shifting component manufacturing into India. Today, I think we've been fairly successful in terms of shifting the assembly and packaging units into India. The value addition, when we talk about mobile phones, value addition in India currently is about 18 to 20% that takes place in India. These are global value chains. These are chains which, regardless of what you do, will be operating across different domains. Even a country like China, today the domestic value addition is in the region of 40 to 45% because they do bring inputs from other places and put it together. So we shouldn't actually aspire to trying to do the entire value chain, but we really need to pick those elements of the components where we can actually make a difference, bring those in and add to this capacity, add to the value addition in India and take it from the present level of about 18% to double that level of about 38 to 40% should be the goal with which we work in order to achieve resilience. Equally, this is the point I was making in terms of how you participate in the global value chains. We need capacity building. We need to look at the industry champions and the way that we can sort of get the private sector to participate in that fully, and the way that big Indian groups are slowly looking at electronics, I think is key and critical. You have before you what the Tatas have been trying to do. You have before you our own very homegrown TI group, which has gone into semiconductors manufacture and so on. So these are important stories, and I think many groups need to sort of get into this area of dirtying their hands with manufacturing in the days to come, manufacturing particularly in the electronics segment. And interestingly enough, I think the interesting story on manufacturing is that and particularly in electronics manufacturing, is that it can actually be value-added manufacturing, at least in certain states. If you look at Tamil Nadu today, I would hazard a guess. I mean, we were the earliest people to help Foxconn and Pegatron and others establish in the state. We have large employment generated by industries of that nature. Today, if you're the largest exporter of electronics, it's only because of the Apple iPhones which are exported from Tamil Nadu. But equally, when you look at the other part of the story, it is primarily an assembling exercise. So what happens is you need large numbers of human resources, you need people to work in those factory floors. And we do not have people of that level of skill and that level of, who are happy just sticking on with a high school education and not going further and prepared to work on that. So all of these companies actually find it difficult nowadays to mobilize from Tamil Nadu or within the state. And therefore, we will have to look at a situation where probably this kind of assembling, what they call ESM functionaries, electronics services, manufacturing services, EMS companies, relocate to other locations where labor is more easily available. And Tamil Nadu becomes really the center for component manufacture, much like the way it is for auto industries and so on, so that higher value added manufacturing can really take place in a state like Tamil Nadu. And the same is true for the neighboring states in the southern part of the country, and probably the EMS manufacturing really needs to happen in places where the labor ultimately comes from, and that's where they also see greater growth as an economy, and it's something that nationally balances out across the entire range. Now, shifting supply chains to India, now this is a very key question where we have to address a number of challenges. We blithely speak of China plus one, and in the process of building resilient supply chains globally, the idea of moving from China is something which is very attractive. Different states, including Tamil Nadu, we ran a program where we were supporting companies who wanted to ship production bases from there. But geopolitically, between India and China, as you're aware, there are a number of tension points, particularly of late, and therefore we have to balance out these interests. And the government of India is looking at this very carefully, because whether it is in terms of direct investment from China, whether it is in terms of issuing visas to Chinese nationals to come and establish businesses or support establishment of businesses, there is clearly an issue which arises. But if the supply chain has to diversify and more of it has to come into India, we have to handle this issue, because the problem today is that even if it's not a Chinese company, even if it is a Taiwanese company or an American company, their production base today is in China. So it really needs to shift. And in some ways, we have to do to China now what China did to the rest of the world a few years ago, in order for this part of the ecosystem to really grow. Now, coming away from the electronic manufacturing part and coming to the services part of the digital economy, I think the whole idea of the services is 3 or 4 things that are happening here. We used to be the outsourcing center of the world, lots of BPOs, all our developments not far from here in terms of the IT corridor, all of you are familiar with, and that's been replicated in different parts of India. And it's a matter of pride that today we export upwards of $200 billion worth of software services every year. But then there are challenges in this space too. And artificial intelligence could replace many of the way that these things work. This year has been one of the worst years for many of the large IT companies, as many of you are aware. Their headcounts have come down, their total growth volumes are down, and it's been a tough year. What do we do in this space, and what is it that needs to happen in the way that this industry grows? First and foremost is the opportunity of global capability centers. Almost about 45% of all global capability centers across the world are located in India. So India is a big magnet attracting this. And clearly, the value addition which happens in these global capability centers, some of it, people say, no, you had a BPO operation which you've renamed as Global Capability Center. I think that's not a very fair characterization, because the kind of functions and the kind of more advanced value-added services which are delivered through this are significant, particularly in terms of design. I already alluded to what is happening with semiconductor design and the number of companies who are in that space. So a large number of GCCs are relocating into India. What is it that we can do to get more of this to happen? Because these are really significantly higher quality jobs, and you can judge these by the average pay that they actually pay out to individual employees. It's not a sweatshop, it's actually quality work being done, and this, I think, is something that needs to be promoted. Tamil Nadu and many other states are promoting this, and much more action in this space is needed to make sure that we get more of these, and these are the kind of jobs that we can actually deliver. And artificial intelligence also offers a huge opportunity here, simply because in terms of, there is a Stanford study which shows that in terms of readiness of human resources, we are one of the most advanced in the world in terms of the number of STEM graduates who can be quickly adapted to this. And these are opportunities that India as a country can take to build resilience in the space that we are looking at today. And clearly the significance of the economic impact of GCCs undoubtedly is very important. And going forward in this space is also that, our own IT companies and others, which are largely IT services companies, they are slowly graduating, but probably they need to become IT product companies as well. And that is a key element of the way that we go forward. The risks involved are larger when you speak to them. Clearly, services, you have a client, you sell, you have a margin, everything is clear. Products, you produce it, you create it, you are not 100% sure that it would sell, and the risks you take are larger, but the margins can also be significant. And why is productization important in some senses? Just to give you, and I'll come back to this, just to give you an example. I mean, if you look at this iPhone, probably in the US it costs $1,000, let's assume for a moment. And if it costs $1,000, all of what we produce here, all of what we put into this here is probably $200 or $250 at best. The rest of the $750 or $800 all stays in one building in California. So, so that is the thing that, design and intellectual property in the way that it can make a difference to the economy in the years to come. I think that's what is the point that I want to emphasize. Now, cybersecurity, again, we spoke about this briefly, how it is becoming more and more important. This is something, and I would I would especially warn the senior citizens here, something we need to be extremely careful about on a day-by-day basis. Cybercrime and what happens with this space is something that is critical, but the national risks are also huge. It's not just at the individual level, but even at a national level, the cybersecurity risks are huge. We are opening ourselves to this. So what we advocate and what we try to do both within government and elsewhere is that secure by design is something that we have to ensure, that even from the time that you start designing a product, you design it in a way that the security interests are taken care of. Now, governance is the other major element, and I think many states have demonstrated that use of ICT in governance is something that can be transformative. And India today is becoming a world leader, is recognized globally as a leader in the digital public infrastructure that it has created and what it can offer to the world in terms of digital public infrastructure, whether it is the Aadhaar basis, which many countries want to look at, UPI, the Unified Payments Interface, which many countries want to look at, our DigiLocker interface. All of these are elements that we can actually take to the rest of the world, and many of these, very interestingly, are by their very design public-private partnerships. There is a public level which is provided as a utility by a government entity or a public entity, and then there are so many private applications which build off of it and actually directly interface and benefit the people. So this is a space where which naturally leads to substantially enhanced opportunities for a wide range of businesses, for a wide range of firms and others to operate. Many of our startups and innovation is based on this, and clearly the opportunities are only growing, and this is something that we end up actually sharing with the rest of the world as something which comes out of India. Now, since we are talking about resilience and we spoke about the kind of impact that climate change can have, the whole question on climate change is really complex, and there are a number of other initiatives, but there are ways in which technology itself can help. There are ways in which technological solutions, technological efforts can be designed. Ministry of Electronics actually works with a number of other ministries, including in renewable energy, in environment and so on, to see what are ways in which we can reduce the impact of climate change and optimize production in such a way that the usage of resources comes down and we become more sustainable. Equally, we need to understand that there are challenges that greater use of technology poses in terms of the pressures that it puts on the environment. Most notably, there's nowadays a lot of awareness of what happens with data centers, and they are big guzzlers of energy. And if you're going to use more artificial intelligence, then again, a lot of processing power and how you manage the power requirements is a key factor. But then again, the way in which you're able to use renewable power to enable this is important. And like I said earlier, the solutions to problems that technology creates possibly lie in using more technology and finding more acceptable technology. Now, this is in terms of what the financing for various elements of climate change is concerned, and many of them are technology oriented, particularly in the mobility and transportation area and in the energy area. Huge opportunities. For instance, when we talk about the energy transition, a huge digital opportunity or manufacturing opportunity is the power semiconductor business that is likely to grow. Silicon carbide, gallium nitride, and all of these semiconductors which need to get made in the country. And that's a huge business opportunity in addition to what we can contribute to the global economy while making our own economy more sustainable and more resilient. Then coming to the other important element of what is again a popular phrase nowadays of being a circular economy, particularly in the electronics side, this has a lot of resonance. Simply because a lot of the materials, a lot of the rare minerals, a lot of the lithium that we need, a lot of the gold that we need, many of those things can actually be recovered through the recycling process. A few months ago, I was at one of the startups in the IIT Madras Research Park, which does exactly this, trying to recover various elements of it. We have a center for recycling in the Center for Materials in Electronics Technology, that is CMET in Hyderabad. Fair amount of extensive work which is being done here. And where it also contributes to resilience is reducing dependence on other sources of supply of such materials, particularly since China is again a leader here, so there are geopolitical risks as well there. So recycling of materials in the electronic sector is a huge opportunity. And given that most of us use so many electronics in our own households and you discard them at a point in time, ensuring that recycling chain is effectively established is very important, because today what happens is a very large proportion of it actually goes into the informal sector, because our informal sector somehow is much more cost effective in the recycling space, but it has its own sets of risks, and some of the material that you need doesn't come back for use in the way that it needs to. So we are working with the Ministry of Environment to ensure that we are able to look at e-waste management as a critical area, and we are able to build greater resilience and greater generation of much needed rare materials within the country. And this could actually become a very key element in our resilience framework. We are the third largest consumer of raw materials which are globally produced, and if we are able to recycle a substantial amount of them, a substantial proportion of them, then that can actually increase resilience. It might be cheaper than trying to buy it from some other jurisdiction. Of course, then coming to what happens with natural calamities and natural disasters, here again, applications of technology are very useful. It's interesting, in MeitY we seem to have fingers in a number of pies. One fine morning, somebody calls me from the National Disaster Management Agency saying that we are running this program for glacial lakes, and in terms of sensors which need to be put there and monitored. And at another time, you're doing something in terms of what's happening with sea erosion, what's happening with monitoring the climate change elements, or what's happening with monitoring extreme weather. So there are a whole host of issues here that we resolve, and the Center for Development of Advanced Computing, CDAC, is the main location where a lot of meteorological research takes place based on the supercomputing facilities that we have available. So in the space of how we address natural disasters and how we build resilience there, technological applications are becoming that much more important. GIS-based applications are becoming that much more important. And that is a space where I think we need to continue to focus. Risk mitigation and ensuring that these issues are addressed in a timely way can actually result in substantial savings to the economy in terms of being prepared for this, and that's where technology can really help. And this is just to give you some kinds of devices and others which we do employ in this space to ensure that digital means are available to protect this. I mean, today, who would have imagined a few years ago giving a satellite phone to a fisherman would have been unimaginable in terms of expense and cost. And today we are in the process of giving every fisherman in the country a satellite phone, and where you can track where exactly they are at sea, and they can call you back in case, and you can reach them when there is a disaster. So in every area of even building resilience against disasters is something that technology offers solutions with. And let me sum up and come back to this point of, what technology could mean to India's GDP growth in the days to come. As I said already, it's growing at twice the pace of the rest of the economy. It's going to occupy a significantly higher share by itself. But more important is the enabling role that it performs in other sectors of the economy. Practically, if you today look at, medicine, or if you look at education, There's so much of technology interface that goes into that, and so much of efficiency that is achieved through the use of technology in those spaces, manufacturing, and practically every area. The technology interface is becoming more and more significant, and if we actually start accounting for it and we are able to get this methodology of properly accounting for it, the growth or the share of the digital economy in the overall economy is likely to be significantly larger, but more importantly, it is likely to contribute to the growth of the other elements of the economy as well. And of course, there's a lot of scope for innovation, a lot of technology startups and others which come. And the other element really here is that the potential that it offers to actually produce inclusive growth, to actually allow for a range of participants to come in becomes much more important. You know, very often, actually, I worry not so much about the younger generation. They'll all pick it up, and the digital divide is not so much. Today, we have 900 million mobile phones in the country. It's no longer necessary that the device you own is a laptop or a computer. It's good enough if it's a smartphone, and that inclusion is taking place. If at all I worry about somebody, it's ageism. I mean, starting with me upwards. I mean, we are not as tech savvy as many other people are, as the younger generation is, and that probably is a much bigger challenge than anything else to inclusive growth. But I think many of the programs that we design today, many of the programs we try to implement, and there are some very large programs. The Indian Semiconductor Mission I already spoke about. It's probably the largest single program of industrial support that has ever been implemented. It's also one of the most generous subsidy programs of industrial policy that is there in the world today. We are spending almost $10 billion from the government of India's side, almost 50% of that by states. So the impact is really $15 billion. And of that $15 billion, clearly, you know, in terms of investment in a new semiconductor facility, almost 70 to 75% is paid for by the government. And, you know, all these years we have only been used to when the industry is established, and when it starts production is when you pay out the subsidy. Here is a case we actually pay out the subsidy as you're building. It's paid on a pari passu basis. It's one of the most, and we really need that to work. We really need that to succeed, because from a strategic perspective, having our own capacity in semiconductor production is just too important to be ignored anymore. If we are a large player in the globe, we need to do it. The India AI Mission, a project worth about 10,400 crores, just launched, very critical in terms of what it can do to provide access to AI-based compute facility for innovators, for startups, for researchers and industries in the country. We are aiming to at least make 10,000 GPUs available for all these sectors in the next 2.5 years. Future Skills Prime is a way in which we ensure that skilling it takes place all the time, reskilling takes place all the time. We implement this in partnership with NASSCOM. We pay for it. NASSCOM actually takes it out. It's a very popular program. I keep reading news reports of how effective it has been even in Tamil Nadu, and how many people have taken advantage of this. And ultimately, it is connectivity across the country, the BharatNet and the 5G connectivity, which really makes it truly inclusive. So the future outlook, the way it looks, the digital economy grows alongside or faster than the rest of the economy, and clearly, as a country, we need to put our bets here. We need to place our bets here to make sure that not only do we grow, but we grow in a fashion that is both resilient and sustainable. Very much for that. Thank you.
Get the head table rearranged so that we can look the other way.
That's the best. Good. Mr. Krishnan, members of G Ramachandran family, distinguished invitees and guests. We in the Madras School of Economics are indeed very happy and feel it privileged to host the 10th G Ramachandran Memorial Lecture here today, this morning. G Ramachandran was an outstanding administrator. I was almost about to say outstanding bureaucrat. Then I stopped saying it because the word bureaucrat carries with it some idea of a strict person who does not have empathy with what other people are saying or what other people are feeling. Now, Mr. G Ramachandran was quite contrary to it, and therefore I prefer to use the word administrator. And to be an efficient administrator, there are two types. There are administrators who execute efficiently